Hello, so the recording has started, and we are here tonight for this lovely author talk with Andrew Joseph White and H.E. Edgmon. My name is Sam Scala. I am the community planning librarian here at the Pollard Memorial Library, and we are here for our last author talk of the year, and my last author talk as well, so I'm very excited to close out the year with such a bang. And let's just go and get started. So like I said, I'm Sam. If you'd like, we have a very cool Q&A section where you guys can put your questions, and then probably towards the last half an hour, 45 minutes-ish, we will be asking those questions to our lovely authors today. So let me introduce them. H.E. Edgmon is an author of queer speculative fiction across genres. Once a stray dog in the rural South, he now makes his home in the Pacific Northwest with a family of his own design. Haunted and hopeful, his work aims to offer levity without flinching from hard truths. His writing and in his daily life, H.E. will always prioritize the pursuit of an Indigenous future, safety for our most vulnerable, and making terrible jokes whenever possible. His first series, The Witch King Duology, was completed in 2022, and the first book in his new series, God the Heathens, was just released last month. And look at how pretty it looks. It looks so pretty. With all its special library binding. So pretty. And next, we welcome Andrew Joseph White. Andrew Joseph White is a queer trans author from Virginia, where he grew up falling in love with monsters and wishing he could be one too. He received his MFA in creative writing from George Mason University in 2022. Andrew writes about trans folks with claws and fangs and what happens when they fight back. He is the New York Times and indie best-selling author of Hell Followed With Us, 2022, and the newly released The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, September 2023. And they're such a pretty cover. Covers are so pretty. And with that, let's get started. So it's been quite a few interesting months. Andrew, your book came out about 3-ish months ago in September. H.E., yours just came out about 2 weeks ago. How are y'all feeling? I know you both went on book tours. H.E., I know you just got back from your book tour. How'd it go? Tell us all about it. Whichever one of you wants to go first.
Listen, two things can be true at once. I am so tired and need to take a nap that lasts like the rest of this calendar year. And also it went so well. It was so good. I had stops speaking with Ray Stovey, I got to talk to in Seattle. Courtney Gold, I got to do an event with in Portland. Darcy Little Badger, I got to meet up with in Texas. And then Adam Sass and I closed the whole thing out at an event in San Diego. And I could not have asked for a better bookend to the whole tour than Mysterious Galaxy with Adam Sass. So many people showed up, and somebody brought me fan art, which I was like, ugh, I think there's a picture of me that somebody took the moment they showed it to me, where I just am like shock and awe. It was great.
So glad. Adam and you and Adam were together, and I was like, how does teleportation not exist yet? I wish it did, because Massachusetts is very far from San Diego.
Yeah, I was like watching everything go on Instagram, and I was like, yes. Like, I know I'm on the East Coast and I'm like vibrating, but the amount of book tours I have done alone this year, because not only did I do the Spirit Bears Its Teeth book tour, which was 2 book tours, 2 mini ones, they also had me on a Hell Followed With Us paperback tour. So I did 2 this year, which is fun because I have a full-time job and I needed to ask for all of that time off. Thankfully, my job has if you tell us far enough in advance, we'll let you do anything as long as you can take the pay cut. So I appreciate it. But it was still, I still felt so bad asking for it. I'd come back and be like, hey, I have another one in October. Can I have another Friday, Monday off when I'm aware I'm the only one in the office and we're going to have to rearrange who's here? Um, I love my coworkers and my boss. They're very flexible and great, and I appreciate them dearly. But it has been busy. And I remember when I heard that you were going on book tour, the first thing I said to you was drink water. Because after I came back from my first book tour, I was so dehydrated. I had trouble driving home from the airport. It was not, I was not prepared. And also, I immediately left my headphones in like Michigan or something. Or
Oh,
Wisconsin. I don't remember where, in the Midwest. I immediately left my headphones there and flew to Chicago. And I'm like, so the first thing I texted was my publicist being like, this is an accessibility issue actually for your, for your autistic like author. And as soon as we met in Chicago, she reached into her purse, pulled out 3 different kinds of earbuds and was like, which one do you want? I was like, and she was like, keep it. I was like, you were the best publicist. I got so lucky.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
um, I do feel like I could have been a little more put together on my own tours, but they were fun. They were fun. Very busy. I would come home and just immediately crash. So I understand. Once we're done, you go to bed.
It's so
yeah.
real about being dehydrated though. Like I felt fine when I got home from San Diego. I was like, damn, I'm doing great. This was awesome. I had such a great time. I woke up the next morning and didn't have my voice anymore.
Yeah. I thought AJ was gonna fall down after Boston.
Yeah, I was kind of yeah.
I was like, oh boy, yeah, all y'all authors need a nap.
The things we do for our
So
readers. Okay, anyway.
I know, right? You go and you do a virtual event right after your book tour, even though you're very tired. So I'm gonna steal this little bit from the last author talk I did with our good friends Adam Sass and Terry Benton Walker, but tell us a little about each other's books. So Andrew, tell us about Godly Heathens. HE, tell us about Spirit.
I'll go ahead and go just because I really want to gush about Godly Heathens because okay. So Godly Heathens is a YA. It kind of hits that like middle ground because like yeah, it's a fantasy, but it's like it's not the first word that comes to mind. And it's about a non-binary teenager named Jem in the Deep South. They are seminal, they are so queer, they have so many things going on. They're a disaster, and I love them to bits and pieces. And it turns out that they are the reincarnated god of magic, who did some really messed up stuff a few lives ago and does not remember. And every other single reincarnated god is super mad about it. Um, and it's very much just like, okay, like, how do I atone for something I can't remember doing? Should I? What happens if you're the bad guy in your own story? And like it's okay if you were, and people still get to love you anyway. It's wild, it's so gay, it's honestly like really heartbreaking, it's full of memes, I love it.
That's so fun.
um and I remember like getting the Microsoft Word document of it in my email a few years ago and being like, how do I not scream about this for like the rest of my life? It was great.
Me reading the arc of, oh no, I have to wait a whole almost a year for this to come out. This is fine. I'm just going to be screaming to myself, I guess.
It's just like I'm being so normal. I'm being so normal. Everyone be proud of
I'm
me.
incredibly normal, clearly.
All right. Okay. It's my turn now.
You got this.
Yeah. So the spirit bares its teeth is the first word that comes to mind when I want to describe this book is like the spirit bares its teeth is gross. But like let me give an
It's true.
actual we give like an actual overview. It's a gothic horror about an autistic trans boy in 1800s England. sent away to a sanatorium and finishing school. The storyline is full of gore and ghosts. But through that storyline, it also explores what it's like to experience ableism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia as an autistic trans person. And the lens for that obviously is this historical setting, but it is so bitingly relevant. But again, it's gross. It is gruesome and disgusting and honestly difficult to read at times. And despite that, or maybe because of that, it is so clearly crafted with so much tenderness and affection. I think that everything that Andrew writes is horrifying in its own way, and all of it comes from this just like deep well of love that he has for the people that he's in community with, and that's really obvious when you read this book. And ironically, given the subject matter, I think that Andrew is kind of like a surgeon when it comes to writing. Like a good surgeon isn't going to waste a single stitch when doing a good suture. And Andrew just does not waste a single word. Like every word that goes down the page is so heavy with meaning. So yeah, that's my pitch.
Honestly, you guys pitch these books so great. And this is clearly the best way to pitch books, is to have each other pitch forever. Someone give Terry and Adam an award for that, because it's brilliant. So, going to chat a bit about the writing process. Always a fun thing to talk about. Where do each of you do your best writing? And what aspect do you feel like you struggle with the most, and how do you work through that?
Well, I tend to write best with the sunrise, and for me, that does not mean getting up early. If I am ending my productivity watching the sun come up, the words that I put down are probably really good. I don't know if it's maybe the subject matter or what, but I just can't write on like a beautiful sunny afternoon. As for like what I struggle with, I actually, when people ask me this question, I think back to when I wrote The Witch King, and Andrew was one of the first people to ever read The Witch King and left feedback on it that was like, I love this. This is so good. I don't know where we are. I don't know what this place looks like. You have not described the setting a single time. I love it. I'm having a good time, but what's going on? And I think about that still to this day, every time that I have to write a setting. So if anything I have ever written reads as atmospheric, it is entirely because of Andrew.
I mean, that's the perks of having a good friend who is really great with things that you're not as strong with and who you can collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. I was going back through my Google Drive and like I found that document with like the old title and everything. I was like, I was a baby. Why was I giving writing advice? Like, what was I doing?
You were right. You were a baby, but you were a very smart baby.
I'll have to chalk that up to the 2 degrees I did absolutely nothing in. Yeah, I got those 2 degrees and I was just kind of like, huh. Okay. But I do my best work because I have a full-time job. I write very piecemeal. Like I'll get to work like 10 minutes early and I'll set like a speed draft timer and do it there. Or like I'll eat I have a half-hour lunch. I eat my lunch in 15 minutes, and then I write for the other 15. I come home, I write until the wife comes home from work, and then I write while the wife's in the tub. And then if I'm on deadline, I will be the most annoying human being in the world and continue until bed while my wife begs me to be like, do you want dessert? Do you want to like get away from the computer for a little bit? Because I haven't seen you all day. So it's very much just grabbing time where I can. Lots of being antisocial on the weekends and being very grateful that I work at a university that gives me a 2-week break over the holiday so that I can get things done, because I have 40,000 words left to write on something that I'm hoping to turn in by January 31st. So RIP. The thing that I struggle with the most, so if you've ever seen an edit letter that I've gotten back from my editor at Peachtree, plotting in endings in particular, I'm not good at it. I remember, because when you're writing a book, there's developmental edits, and then there's scene, and then there's line, and then there's copy edits and proof, and they all get more granular as you go. I was fixing the last like 100 pages of The Spirit Bears Its Teeth into copy edits. Like
I thought that book was gonna kill you.
The amount of times that I almost threw it away. Like I rewrote it from scratch, I think twice. I broke the ending, I think 5 times, until my editor gave up and wrote me a chapter by chapter outline of how it had to go. Because she was just like, this book isn't coming out on time unless I tell you what to do. Thankfully, it was just like a quilt of all of my previous endings and everything I had done correct there. Which made it really funny that when I got my first edit letter for book 3, my editor just immediately gave me the bullet points. It just didn't waste any of the time. And she's like, I see what you're doing here. You're really close. Bang these chapters in order. Like, make these changes in order. And I was like, okay, thank you, Ashley. She's right, because my editor is a genius, but like, I love like character work. I love voice. I love scene. I love dialogue. It is the overarching thing that gets me. I am getting better at it, largely because I'm training myself out of the I played a lot of video games growing up, so all of my books in my head end in boss battles, and I have to undo that. That doesn't work. It worked for Hell Followed With Us. It doesn't work for any of my other stuff. So I'm reading books and I'm like, okay, Andrew, let's do a little literature class. How does this book end? Like, let's think about it. Let's diagram it. Let's go back to 5th grade. And I'm like, okay. So I'm working on it.
I think y'all are both doing great.
Thank you.
But I'm a little biased, but I think you're both doing great. Speaking a little more about craft, both Godly Heathens and The Spirit Bears Its Teeth contain some really in-depth world building. And do you guys use any like specific resources or websites to help you keep all those ideas together? Are there any specific inspirations for either book that helped you come up with the ideas?
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. When it comes to my world building, right? It's like when you go see a play, and there's the pieces, like if you're like watching a play that takes place on a street in a village, right? And you see the houses, but if you knock the house over, it's a flat piece of wood being held up by beams, and that's my world building. I come up with exactly as much as I need to make the book make sense. And then it is duct tape and bubble gum and like stitches behind it. People are always like, oh, like what about like this thing? Like what's going on? Like for Hell Followed With Us, someone would be like, what's going on in Canada? I'm like, I don't know, because that didn't come up.
Sounds like they should write some fanfic.
It's very much just like, it's just however much I need to get the point across. It seems to have worked so far, but every time someone points out a hole in the world building, I'm like, yeah, I know. Do I know what it? No, I haven't thought that far. I haven't thought that deeply into it, actually. No, I don't know. So another fun little character flaw of mine. But when it comes to the Spirit Bears Its Teeth, the inspiration, a lot of this comes from the fact that my father works in the medical field. He does pulmonary and cardiac rehab, which is heart and lungs, very often after transplants. So I remember being like 11 and my dad was explaining how a heart transplant works. And it's like you break and crack everything. You have to break the bones to get in there, right? He was explaining how it works. And it was at the dinner table and I was just eating and my mom was like, stop, I can't eat with you two talking like this. So this was just normal in my house growing up. So everything having to do with like surgery and everything that Silas does, I would just run it by my dad and be like, hey, the character has to do an emergency bowel surgery with literally just like a needle and thread, no anesthetic, nothing to like, how do we do this? And he's like, okay. And he sends me text about like that long and a YouTube video of an actual bowel surgery, which I could not watch. So thanks, Dad. I couldn't sit through it. I couldn't do it. I can't make myself watch a Saw movie. I don't know how I was supposed to watch a real surgery. But it's fine.
That is so funny to me that you.
I'm so bad at horror movies. It's embarrassing.
That's just wild to me.
Like I went to see Nope. Like I love Jordan Peele. I went to see Nope, and I was like holding my wife's hand the whole time. It was so good, but I was just like, eh. It's so. It's so. At the very least, I read the Saw wiki because the traps are fascinating, and I want to know more. I can't see them though. I can't do it.
I would say they should have you write a Saw book for like the IP, but then you'd have to like figure out how you'd make that work if you haven't seen the movies.
I want to write Purge IP. They haven't taken it far enough left, in my opinion, and I'll do it. I'll do it.
Oh.
I'll take it there. I'll do it.
They should let you. So I am the exact opposite when it comes to world building. I have like a master doc of
Oh,
of I know everything. I know everything that has ever happened to any of these people that I write about.
that's so cool.
And like I have said this, a few times while I was on tour that like I would love someday to be able to write more in this universe. You know, it's not like a plan, it's not like a thing that's in the works. Don't anybody think that that's me like hinting at something, but like there are so many stories that I know exist that I just like Jim doesn't care about it. So like it never comes up because like Jim doesn't care about most things, so it never comes up. Um, but yeah, when I'm doing world building, like characters are like the heart of anything that I write. So characters are the first thing that I know. I have known Jim for years and like fully formed been able to see Jim. And so the whole of the world is built around Jim. When we're talking about like inspiration for like elements of world building, it always comes down to like, okay, I need Jim backed into a corner. What can I build to back Jim into this corner? And then what the hell did Jim do to deserve being backed into this corner?
Look, they definitely did something.
They have always done something. When or like with the character Poppy, her whole design is like, okay, I am going to build a character who will annoy Jim so much. I'm going to build a character that Jim Eccles will hate on sight. Yeah.
That's just so fun, just torturing your children.
Yeah.
And you actually kind of answered part of, leads me into another question. So you're both of your books have exceptionally well-developed secondary characters. Are there any characters in either of these books or your other books that you wish you could have spent more time with but weren't able to?
Poppy.
You adore
I love
Poppy
her
so
so
much. And it's
much.
so cute. And it's so cute.
Listen, Corpse Barbie is my baby girl.
I
um,
love Poppy so much.
I like dream scenario someday in the future, I will get to write like a Poppy and Marion short story or something. Because I have more to say. But again, like Jim doesn't care. Jim certainly doesn't care about them and whatever they have going on.
I think short story collections are a great way to complete things in your world.
That feels pointed. Feels a little pointed. So
I could not resist walking into that
yeah,
one.
One of the things that was interesting about Hell Followed With Us was that in the original version of the book, there were a lot more points of view. And they were inevitably cut because the advice that I got was like, you're not writing a Tom Clancy novel. You don't need to see where all the warships are on the battlefield at all times. Like, that's not important. Focus on Benji. But if I hadn't gotten that advice, there definitely would have been chapters in this from Daphne's point of view. Daphne is the love interest of this book. She is a trans girl who is doing her best.
I love her so
Considering the
much.
situation that she's in, she's really not able to do much. But I love her so much, largely because, you know, like the main character's fixation is on surgery. He sees the world through surgery. Daphne sees the world through fiction, which is how I end up seeing the world. I feel like her point of view would have been really interesting because it might have actually forced me to read a classic for the first time in my life. I don't read them very often. I have a running joke that like Shakespeare to me is like another language. When I was reading it in high school, I had to get like the modern English translations because I could not understand it. Daphne would love Shakespeare and like all of like the Greek and Roman classics that I really struggled with. The only time I would know a Latin classic is because I would have translated it in Latin class because I took Latin because dear God. But I just think that would have been fascinating because I kind of want to see because like Silas spends the whole time gushing about Daphne and how beautiful and perfect his future wife is. I really would have liked to see Daphne do the same for Silas, largely because it would have been tinged with a little more pity, and I think that would have been fun. There would have been some interesting sides to her character that we didn't get to see, largely because it's from Silas's point of view. Just that little bit of this sad little soggy kicked puppy that I am engaged to, who likes cutting people open for some reason. I just have to deal with this now. I just think like her perspective on Silas would have been really interesting. This little kicked puppy that she's engaged to.
That would have been so much fun. Okay, so I'm gonna ask probably one or two more questions and then we will jump to audience questions because we have quite a few of them. Both Godly Heathens and The Spirit Bears Its Teeth handle some pretty dark themes and subject matter, from abuse to transphobia to certain medical procedures. How do you tackle such themes while keeping it appropriate for your young adult audiences? Because each of you also write for different audiences. HE, you have a book coming out for middle grade. AJ, you have a book coming out for adult. So how do you make your YA books the most suitable for a young adult audience?
I know I'm really interested in hearing how you talk about like your differences between middle grade and YA, because I'm not allowed to touch middle grade as a human being. No. Because like as I'm writing my adult book and I'm looking at the differences and how I handle similar topics actually in my YA and my adult, because in The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, there is a lot of discussion of like the horrors of pregnancy and like the fear of it and what it means. And my adult book is about being pregnant and the horror of it and what it means, specifically as a the main character is a trans man who is like, this is like the worst possible thing that could have happened to me, and I just have to deal with it. And largely what it comes down to is, so I have a rule when it comes to writing YA, is that if the main character can't look away, neither can you. And my whole thing is like, kids know if you're flinching from pushing a topic all the way. Teens are smart, they know. So I push all of my horror as far as it goes, which means that I have to pick scenarios where pushing it all the way isn't going to do more damage than it's worth. So I go all the way with what I'm doing, but I have to pick carefully exactly what I'm doing. And tying in with that is the idea of cynicism. My YA books, I am specifically writing for a very vulnerable population, you know, queer and disabled children, dear God. So all of my books, the whole point is that the whole point of all of the horror is you will survive whatever you're going through. It doesn't matter how horrific it is, you know, I promise that you can make it out alive on the other side. My adult books, they have no such moral obligation to their audience. My adult books is, I'm just going to scream for 400 words and you have to make sense of it. So it's very much just like why you're writing it as opposed to what you're writing. Because Peachtree Teen really does let me get away with anything.
They do.
I am so shocked. I'm so shocked that the cesarean made it. And at no point was my editor ever like, tone this back. I just like, nope, that's how it's going to be. Complete, just every single detail, 2,000 words, just get in there. And I was like, okay.
HE, go for it.
Yeah, so I just don't think that there actually is such a thing as appropriateness when writing for children. I think that unfortunately, any horrible thing that I can imagine in my messed up little brain, there is at least a dozen kids who have lived through that, or you know, maybe with a little less fantasy involved. Um, so I don't think that there are any topics that I, for my writing, consider to be off limits, and that goes for both YA and middle grade. And this is something that like I have run into more with middle grade than YA, because my YA does exist at sort of like the cusp of being adult. Um, but being met with comments on the middle grade like they act too old, they I don't know if this makes sense for this age, and having to come back and be like, they act like they have trauma, like that's what that is, that's what you're reading. um I think that the key difference in the way that I approach writing about horrible things for those age groups is that with middle grade, I do feel a certain responsibility to both validate that like what you have experienced was not fair and it should not have happened to you, and also that doesn't have to be your life forever, because I know that when you are that young and you don't have any control over your life, the idea that you can like craft a whole life of your own design is like you don't even know what that looks like.
Exactly.
And so like that feels really important to me. With YA, it's a lot less like things get better, and a lot more like, hey, things might not ever get better. You are still deserving of being happy. Like the world might always be on fire, but you still deserve to find something that makes you feel like life is worth living in the middle of that fire. Because also like, I mean, middle grade and YA readers, kids in those age ranges, like they're they're not incapable of seeing through you when you're like patronizing them and patting them on the
Exactly.
head and telling them that like, don't worry, everything is fine, because they know that it's not fine.
The
Absolutely.
visceral response I always had to the It Gets Better campaign, I even as like even in like middle school and early high school, I'm like, don't.
It just that it just does not work with kids and teens. Like when you're in the thick of whatever you're going through, especially as a kid and a teen, it's so hard to see the end of that. And what might not feel like a big deal to an adult is so different than when you're a kid or a teen.
Mhm. And here's the thing about like childhood trauma, right? Because we write about kids who are living through trauma.
Mhm.
The thing is, like, if you make it to adulthood, you're always going to be an adult with trauma. Like, you might not ever get better. You might not ever like heal. Like, I think that it does so much more good for kids to be like, hey, this honestly might mess you up forever, but like you can still make a life worth living with the other messed up people.
It's true though. Like you
It
still
is.
deserve that happiness. So from here, I am going to say, let's take some audience questions because we have quite a couple. So let's start with Aaron Knott asked, what was the publishing process like? What's the most difficult part?
I think that my most difficult part of like the overall publishing process is knowing what to do next. Because like I have at any given time dozens of ideas that I could latch onto and explore. But like, unfortunately, there are so many factors that go into the right book to work on next. Um, and so anytime that I am like no longer on deadline and don't really have anything on my plate, there's just this moment of like, where do I go from here? I don't know. What do you want from me, publishing? Let me keep making books.
Like, please.
Yeah.
Please let them keep writing books because I like their books very much. Their books make me very happy.
I think that the hardest thing for me is like the moment where the book goes out into the world and I am like, it's just like, yes, I know, because I'm thinking of this with book 3, where, you know, I get the second round of edits soon, like the arcs go out, I'm pretty sure in a few months, and I'm just sitting here like, I've what if this is the one they don't like? You know, like what if I have messed up in some massive, unforeseen, undefinable way that I'm completely ignorant of, and it's just a bust. And I'm just sitting there, just like twiddling my thumbs, being like, well, I hope this one's good too. Like, and it's always just like I do know in those first few weeks, my wife was always just like, you better not be on Goodreads. Close it. Like a dog with like a rabbit. It's like, put it down. Drop it. So it's definitely it's the fear of being perceived. I don't like being perceived. I'm not a fan. Um I like the emails that I get from like 15-year-olds saying how much the book meant to them. I don't like being perceived. I'm not a fan.
Yes. We're all incredibly normal here.
The number of times that I had to say on tour to a 15-year-old, I'm sorry that I'm so awkward and can't make this less awkward for you. Like, one of us should know how to talk to people, and it should be me because I'm the adult here, but I'm so awkward.
My go-to is when people be like, I don't know how to talk to you in an overworld, and I'm always just like, I am just some guy. Like, I don't know how to explain to you that like I'm just some dude.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people, I think, forget that authors are like just regular people too. It's like, yeah, y'all are just regular nerds, and you're wonderful regular nerds who write lots of weird and wonderful books. I'm going to ask another question from our audience. Lucky asks, are there any themes or content you started exploring in Hell Followed with Us and the Witch King duology that you were excited to explore more or differently in your other books?
I see you. What are you doing?
So both the Witch King duology and the Ouroboros duology deal with sexual trauma. But they do it in very, very different ways. The way that the main characters think about the things that have happened, the way that the narrative treats the things that have happened. And I think that I was excited feels like a weird word when that is like the subject matter, but like I really did enjoy getting to highlight like the different experiences that people can have processing and moving through those things, because there's no one way that it looks for anybody. Yeah, that's my short answer. Yeah.
I know that I tell this story a lot, but it's probably one of my favorites. As I was writing Hell Followed with Us, I realized that the love interest of the book, you know, aloof, quiet, distant from people, kind of awkward, kind of like hit some of like the basic, like be like, oh yeah, that's kind of what autism looks like. And I remember like reading a post about someone, I think on Twitter, saying that like a lot of like bad boys in media are just like autistic coded. I was like, that's fascinating. You know what? I'm going to do a bunch of research. I'm going to, you know, it's not going to be parents and doctors. It's going to be actual autistic people. And I'm going to follow them on Twitter, and I'm going to watch their videos, and I'm going to read their blogs, and I'm going to get a bunch of information. And I'm going to make the love interest of my first book a really cool, really badass, like autistic guy. That's going to be so interesting. You know, this is such a good idea. And then I'm doing all of the research, and I'm like, well, but this is just like normal. So, like everybody feels like this. So I don't know what's like I don't know how I'm supposed to like write this any different. Okay. So I ended up this was not a great thing for me to do. I will take ownership of it. I scrapped all of that research, wrote Nick as myself, and just slapped the autism label on it and sent the book out. And I was like, well, we're just gonna see what happens. And then we started getting the early reader responses being like, this is some of the best autistic rep I've ever seen. And I was like, well, that saved me $3,000. So when it came to The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, I was like, as I was writing that, I was like, this book is me like trying to figure out the black box of my own brain, especially because alexithymia, emotional blindness, which is something I'm very prone to, means that I don't know what I'm feeling, and I often don't have words for it. And when I do know what I'm feeling, I just might not show it, just because my face doesn't do that. So it was very much trying to untangle the knot of masking that I had tied myself into as a kid. And as my next books go, Compound Fracture, like the main character finds out that he's autistic in the middle of the book, when like an autistic adult is like, yeah, I saw it in you as a kid, and like your parents like didn't do anything about it when I brought it up, but you seem to hide it really well, and it's breaking down now and you can't hide it anymore. And my adult book, the main character just doesn't talk. He can. He just hates you. And doesn't want to.
It's
So
true.
it's been really
That's right.
fun like writing him, because the sort of like selective silence like is something that I find myself doing a lot. So it's been a lot of fun to like really get to explore that part of myself that surprise.
You know, that is so interesting, because when the Fake Keeper came out, I had a couple of people say to me that Amir read as autistic, and I was like, that's so interesting. That's so interesting that you said that. And then when I was waiting for edits to come back on Godly Heathens, somebody in my life was like, I mean, you're autistic, right? To me. And I was like, no. Well, no. And then I read Godly Heathens back as I was working on revisions. And I was like, reading all of these chapters where Jem is just like studying people to learn how to copy their behaviors. And I was like, I've said this before, but Jem is the closest thing I could possibly write to a self-insert. And I was like, huh, that we'll circle back to that later. We'll deal with that.
We're just gonna put a pin in this.
Yes,
We'll put that in a box
I'm
for a minute.
rescheduling this for sometime next year.
Sometime when you have actual time to process that.
Yeah, that we don't have time to unpack that right now. There's too much going on.
Yeah, that was me as well for a while. I was like, I'm gonna put that in a box and we'll deal with it at some point.
The studying other people is so real. I call it my little mental Rolodex. Like, I discovered that people love it when I, instead of goodbye, say take it easy. They love it. That is the only way I have ever closed a conversation in 2 years. They love it. They get a kick out of it. I'm like, that's great. I'm never going to use anything else.
My grandma was like that too. She would never say goodbye. It was always see you later. So we have a really cool question from Milo. This one specifically for HE. How did you decide what each god's domain would be?
You know, I have been asked that question like a few times at different things since the book came out, and I feel like I don't have an interesting answer, and maybe at this point I should craft one, because it feels like a question that people want an interesting answer to. I again, like when it goes back to the world building, it is like entirely with Jem at the heart of the story. And so even when doing like uh the Pantheon, the question becomes like, okay, what what gods do I need to cause the most problems for Jem? And also like what gods do I need that can maybe resolve those problems? And like, and then once I understand what they need to do as gods, you know, you have like the magician, which is like Jem's like who Jem is, like the god of magic. Then like, okay, who are these other gods in this lifetime, as it would be worst for Jem. Um,
Poor Jem.
yeah.
We're going to make that the log line at this point.
I mean, poor Jem, but also poor everyone who has to interact with Jem.
Yeah.
I love that for them.
Poor Jem, but also poor everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And then Andrew, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is horrifying. How much of that is based in research/reality versus fully made up?
Oh, I like this question. So one of the things that I love to bring up is that, well, people like a lot of the times like, so what is veil sickness really? And I've gotten a few different like answers, like being like, oh, is it this? And it's just a rework of hysteria. So yeah, just like there hysteria has existed under a couple different names. In history, I think like the one in the 50s was like neurasthenia or something. I can't exactly remember. But it has just been like woman is weird. Why she do that? And that's what hysteria has been. And I really wanted to explore that specifically through like a transmask lens. One of the things that I really like doing is like taking like things just like the gendered experiences and then throwing them through like a transmask lens. And it's like, not only does this suck because this is a sucky thing to go through in general, but when you add the additional misgendering on top of it, it's a whole thing. um Lots of the other things in this book are honestly, a lot of the things in this story are based on modern situations. For example, and some of the stuff in it is actually, some of it's a little anachronistic and too modern. The way that the main character Silas is described at the end of the book is a high functioning imbecile. The sort of medical terminology where imbecile was like a medical term actually came after the events of this book. It was hard to find like actual terminology for disabled people in this era. It was really difficult, so I just had to make do with what I had. But a lot of the sanatorium itself is based on conversion therapy, very obviously, and also the way that disabled kids in particular are treated in certain residential facilities, like the Judge Rotenberg Center. I was talking to a few like disabled activists in my circle talking about like hashtag stop the shock and stuff like that. So a lot of that came from that as well. I know that Silas in the story talks about having gone through like a sort of like tutoring, which is analogous to like applied behavioral analysis therapy, which is just dog training, but for humans, and it sucks and it's bad. Um, and also a lot of it was taken like from horrifically modern things. And part of the reason that I like the book so much is that it bridges like it uses like the backdrop of like the horrors of history to be like things have changed in maybe name only, really, to like really take a look at that. It was hard to research. I have to admit, it was hard to research. There's some not fun stuff. But what was fun was discovering that this takes place around the time that they discover that hand washing was good. So the main character is very proud that he washes his hands.
I love that. Um, Someone else asks, you both weave in such incredible metaphors and analogies about being queer, trans, disabled in your writing. What does your process look like for that if you feel like you have one?
When I'm coming up with like the horror, I think for me, when I'm coming up with the horror of a novel, um, it's literally just like, what is the worst thing to happen to this kind of queer? Or what is the worst thing to happen to someone with this disability, right? And just go from there. So like with The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, it was very like, oh, it would be really terrible putting a trans guy in an all-girls boarding school that is rife for a bunch of terrible stuff. Let's do it. So I'm just like, what's the worst thing I could do to this character? And a lot of it plucks at the trauma of being marginalized. So when it comes to like, hey, what's the worst thing that I could do? It very often comes down to that. Um, which makes a lot of sense because when I'm plotting all of my books, like the way that I plot my books is like, all right, what's a bunch of horrible stuff that could happen? Let's find ways to like make these in an order that is good to read. My plotting documents are the bleakest thing in the world.
I feel like the process for me looked really different between The Witch King and Godly Heathens. Um, The Witch King was originally written in 2019 and then was almost entirely rewritten in revisions in 2020. Um, and it was always intended to be a very clear metaphor for transphobia and the sort of first wave of like anti-trans legislation that we were seeing, and um like systemic violence against trans people. And so I was taking things that were happening like in the news right then, that were scaring the shit out of me, and I was just plotting over them. It was, it was like taking a moment in time when I was like afraid and just wallpapering it with my own book. Um, and I didn't want to do that again with Godly Heathens. I don't necessarily intend to ever write again another book that is like meant to be a metaphor for being trans. I will always write trans characters. I don't know about cis people, but like I I I have a lot of stories that I want to tell. They're not all metaphors about transness. But with Godly Heathens, I think it comes through in a much more subtle way. I've talked about how uh, the whole point of Jem's arc is like, okay, you are this really, really horrible person. You have done these really, really horrible things. Can you come back from them? And where that was drawn from for me was being a young queer person who grew up in the rural South, who grew up with a conservative family, who grew up in the Bible Belt, and had to craft this like spiky exterior in order to protect myself. And then really only in the last year or so, like year and a half, um, being able to start peeling that back and realizing like, oh, like I did this in order to protect myself and it was necessary and it allowed me to survive, but I also was such a dick. Um, and like it's a much less slap you in the face kind of metaphor, and it applies to experiences outside of that specific experience. But I think that just by nature of being who I am and having lived the life that I've lived, the lens that I pull stories from will always be queer. It will always be infused with that in one way or another.
I think that's a really, I think that's like, you draw on what you know. And do any of us have straight cis friends?
Maybe my coworkers. I don't ask them about their private lives all that much.
I want to ask one more question and then probably gotta wrap it up. But I feel like Alder would be very sad if I didn't ask their question. What is one of your favorite shareable world or character building aspects that didn't make it into the final draft?
This is a good question.
It's a really good question.
I'm thinking of Hell Followed With Us for this question. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I had to cut a lot of stuff when all of the POVs got cut. Not only did a lot of POVs get cut, but a lot of flashbacks got cut too. And a lot of the stuff that ended up getting cut was the experience of the main character's life in the far right fascist evangelical cult that he grew up in. There was a lot of, and like the thing that stands out to me the most was the scene where the main character is like 11 or 12, and has just moved into this cult compound and is watching the adults train for the end of the world, trying to figure out what's going on. And it was such a good scene. It was so cool, especially because like he's talking to his only friend at this point, the person that he would grow up to be semi-forcibly engaged to, and being like, who are we now that, we're middle schooler, we have been pulled out of school, we are now in this cult compound, like we have been cut off from the rest of society, and all of the adults are saying that the world is going to end and it is a good thing. How are we handling that as children? Because I thought that would be very enlightening for like the way that the main character reacts to everything throughout the rest of the book. And through editing, we realized that like just by like the way that Benji sees the world, you can infer all of that. So it did have to go, but it was such a cool scene. Like I'm so bummed it had to go.
That sounds really cool.
When I first turned in Godly Heathens, it was like tens of thousands of words over where it could be for the word count. So revisions were just like, it was like, okay, this is great. Cut so much.
I would read the original. That's too long. I would 100% read that in a heartbeat.
And like Godly Heathens is technically a contemporary fantasy, but I have also explained to people that like there are scenes that are historical in the book, and there are scenes that take place in what I would consider to be like a more high fantasy world. Like it is a fantasy that sort of spans different genres, much in the same way that like Jim spans different genres. And in order, literally just to meet the word count requirements, what we end up losing was mostly things that we see in past lifetimes. And so they're still throughout the book, but like there may be shorter, or maybe we lost like a whole scene here or there. And I enjoyed writing those so much, because it gives you so much more context for not just Jim, but also the entire pantheon, and like how we got from point A to point B. Like Jim is both the god of magic and also this horrible little teenager, but also has lived like a myriad of lives in between, that have like slowly shifted them into who they are now. And so those historical scenes, I loved writing, and I would go back and write more of them.
That sounds like they sound so fun though.
Yeah.
Like, they just sound so fun. So as we close up, I would like you to talk about some 2024 books that you're looking forward to, and also plug your next books that are coming out in 2024.
Have you pre-ordered Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White yet?
I have. I very much have.
Listen, I said twice on book tour that Compound Fracture is my favorite of your books, and I said it in result to like or in response to questions that I had gotten from specific people, and I watched their faces both times go. But it's true. I have been like grinding my teeth for this one for so long.
I got away with using the word socialist in the book description. I didn't have to cut it.
And we love to see it. We absolutely love to see it.
Other 2024 books that I can plug. Terry J. Benton Walker
I'm so excited. So
mhm.
excited.
Yeah.
I'm
Actually has
I'm listening to the
two.
audiobook for Blood Justice for Blood Deaths to get
Isn't it
ready to
so
read the
good?
arc. And
Oh,
it's
so
so good. It's so good.
Um, there's two of his books that I want to plug. So
Hmm.
Blood Justice, obviously, um, which is coming out, God, in April,
April
right?
23rd.
April, yeah.
okay, April.
And then also the anthology, The White Guy Dies First,
I'm so
um,
excited.
which I had like the immense pleasure to have a short story in, which I love the story that I wrote, and also just like the whole thing, like it's such a powerhouse of authors who are on that anthology that when I was invited to do it, I was like, did I do this by mistake? Like, this is cool. This is wow. But I was talking to Adam Sass in California about how his next book, Cursed Boys and Broken Hearts, which is so good. So good. Is coming out the same day as The White Guy Dies First. We
That's
did use the word
hilarious.
we did use the word Barbenheimer to describe that experience. Um, just I am such a big fan of Adams and such a big fan of Terry's, both as just like people and also their writing. So yes, all
They're
all
just
all
so
three of
good.
those.
I don't even read romance, and I think I'm gonna have to read Adam's romance books. Like, I don't read romance, but they sound really good.
He does it different. It's just different because he's so like the snark just comes through so strong.
So for my recommendations, have you pre-ordered Merciless Saviors yet? I have the Word
Believe
doc
me, I
like
have.
in like my email, and I have a 2 week break. I get to read it finally. I'm so excited. Um, and I think my follow-up for that is going to be The Poisons We Drink by Bethany Baptiste. I keep hearing
Hmm.
about it more and more, and I saw like
It
a little
sounds
snippet of it.
so good.
I think I'm gonna lose it about this book, right? Because like all of the way that Bethany's been talking about it. Okay, so not only is it angry, right? Because I every time I hear like angry book, because I remember like being in college, be like, oh, it's such an angry book, and I'm like, this is just a white boy being sad about something for 200 pages. I'm bored. However, I know that if Bethany is writing an angry book, it's gonna be perfect. I'm seated, I'm listening, I'm here, I'm ready. And it just looks so like it's such like a visceral response to everything that's been happening that I am so ready. I cannot wait. And like the scene where like the snippet that I've read was like, yeah, this girl has magic powers that kill people, so she just has a gun. And I'm like, yes. Like this is the
Please have
best.
guns and magic.
I was like, I can't wait. I am seated. I'm ready. So I have my eye out for that. Also, the cover's
Mhm.
beautiful.
The cover is
So many
it's
of these
stunning.
2024 books have such beautiful covers.
Like
Like,
Mhm,
they just keep getting better every year.
mhm.
I'm just looking at it, I'm like, it's stunning. Like,
I'm
especially
a
because like the concept is just everything about it, and it's so bright. It's so
mhm,
pink and vibrant. I'm
mhm,
like, I'm obsessed immediately.
I'm
It's gonna be so good.
obsessed with this thing where we're taking like dark books and giving them these like beautiful bright pink covers. More of that, please.
Speaking of bright
It's
pink
perfect.
covers, So Left Them Red is
Yes.
also
Yes,
so good and
excellent.
also so beautiful. And also
I
Hmm.
Cat is
think
amazing.
my wife and I are yeah, I'm pretty sure that I think I might be leaving work early to go to the politics and prose stop
Yes.
for that book. I am so excited.
I love
Oh,
that.
we have to pitch our next books. Oh geez. Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pitch your next
Almost
books.
forgot about
Or
that.
you could pitch each other's next books.
I haven't read Merciless Saviors yet, so
Oh
that'll screw me
God.
over.
Oh, never mind. Don't do that then.
All I know is that Gem's just gonna be worse. Um,
Yes, that's true.
Gem's is gonna be worse. I'm so excited. And then you did let me. I did end up reading like the opening scene where I can't even talk about it. I forgot. I can't
Something real
actually
bad happens.
I can't actually talk about it in polite company. I love that.
No, Merciless Saviors picks up like it's like the next sentence after Godly
Yeah,
Heathens. It's
it's
immediate. And I had somebody say to me that it feels just like reading a part two of the same book, and that is true. Because there is you have no time to take a breath.
No
Um,
breaths.
and within the first 3 chapters, I had written the most horrifying thing I have ever written. And I was like, oh, good, cool. I don't know if they're gonna let me get away with this. They did. They
I
did.
think the email you sent me, it was just like, do you want some pregnancy horror? And I was like, it's like, yes. Yes, I do.
If anyone wants that, you know it's AJ. You know it's Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say anything about how we get there in the first 3 chapters because it won't make any sense and would also spoil everything. So
Don't spoil it. It's too
Wait,
good to
how do you
spoil.
pitch Merciless Saviors without like what's your pitch for Merciless Saviors without spoiling Godly Heathens? How do you
Yeah.
um so well, it's hard, but what the best pitch that I have come up with is that if Godly Heathens is about Jim Eccles trying to identify all of the separate parts of themselves, the part that is the teenager, the part that is in love with their best friend, the part that is a god, the part that has this soulmate, the part that has done horrible things, the part that wants a happy ending. If Godly Heathens is about Jim coming to terms with all of those different sides of themselves and sort of being pulled apart, then Merciless Saviors is about Jim trying to stitch all of those pieces together to create one person. And it begs the question of, when you do that, are you healed or have you made a monster?
Ooh. Put that on like put that on like a t-shirt or something.
I'm being so normal. I'm being so normal.
Yeah, we're all incredibly normal in this group tonight.
Oh man, I have to figure out how to pitch Compound Fracture. Because our short description for the book is the longest that we've ever put together because there's a lot going on. Um, it is a super queer, super like Appalachian, super political book about a trans autistic 16-year-old who has grown up in a family that is in a blood feud with the family of the local sheriff. And this has gone back to the Coal Wars, where where law enforcement publicly executed the figurehead of a coal strike, and it has just been going back and forth for 100 years. And the main character finds proof, that the local sheriff has, hurt his father, killed his best friend's mom, like done a bunch of other horrible stuff. And it's like, we're going to get rid of this sheriff finally and hopefully put an end to this. It doesn't work. He gets found and beaten nearly to death in the woods. And it turns out that the local sheriff threatens him into silence because the sheriff's son and his friends are the ones that did it. And the ghost of his great great grandfather is like, all right, like we're finishing this. It's been 100 years exactly of this blood feud. We are ending it. And the entirety of this poor rural West Virginian county coming together from a bunch of different backgrounds for a bunch of different reasons, using like a bunch of different motives and plans, in an incredibly messy and violent way to try and finally get rid of this sheriff and like stop the stranglehold that's been on this county for 100 years. It's pretty brutal. Funnily enough, it's my first book that isn't a horror novel. It's my first book that isn't a horror novel. A 17-year-old still gets his jaw blown off in a meat processing plant. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in.
I know that I said earlier that like with all of the like gore and the gruesome stuff that you write, I still feel like all of it comes from this incredibly tender and
Mhm.
loving place. And from where I am sitting, Compound Fracture is just like soaked with so much of like the violent love that you have for Appalachia. And like the way that you write about that, I
Because like it's set in a fictionalized version of the town my mamaw grew up in.
Mhm.
It's of course like I grew up saying mamaw and papaw at school, and a bunch of kids being like, "What is that?" And I was like, "So you didn't grow up with moonshine in the freezer?" Like, I don't. What are you talking? Okay, uh, but like it was honestly really funny because my dad is like fact checking it, um, and he texted me being like, "Hey, the antagonist has this family name. There is actually a family by that name in the town that your grandmother is from. We need to make sure that there is not a person with that full name in that town because you kill him." So maybe ask
Interesting.
Mamaw if there's anyone from her hometown she doesn't like. Um, so
That might be bad.
like, all right, Mamaw, what are we doing?
Time to look at the census records.
Like, oops. Sorry to the Ruckle family from Tucker County, West Virginia. I didn't do it on purpose.
But with that, I think it is time to let HG go take a nap.
Oh, I have to go make dinner. Oh man. Oh no. Okay.
But
Yeah.
thank you guys so much for being here. And thank you everyone who listened in and who will eventually watch the recording. This was such a lovely time. And it was a great way to end out the year and for me to do my last author talk here. So
Yeah.
it is. And I'm very excited to go back to New York. But also, it was very lovely just to be able to do this with you guys. So I'm going to end the recording right now, unless you guys have anything you want to add.
Be gay, do crime. Okay.
Yeah,
Be gay, do
that about
crime.
covers it.
Cool.